And we've changed our diets really quite radically over the last 300 years and even more over the last 50 years with all this extra sugar and white flour, fertilizing what we really think of as disease-promoting bacteria and yeast.
Welcome to the What Up Doc University podcast, your number one resource for total body wellness. Here's your host, Dr. Mike.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the What Up Doc University podcast. This is Dr. Mike, and we got another great episode today. Today is a really, really good episode, and it's Dr. Terry Wahls. We talked about her video from the TED Talk earlier, and I'll put those in the show notes. And I posted that up in the Facebook group. But let me give you a little bit of a background on Terry Wahls if you don't know who she is. So Dr. Terry Wahls, she's a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa. Yay, people out in Iowa. She's author of the Wahls Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles and Functional Medicine, and also the cookbook, The Wahls Protocol, Cooking for Life, the revolutionary modern paleo plan to treat all chronic autoimmune conditions. And you can learn more about her work from her website, www.terrywahls.com. She hosts the Wahls Protocol Seminar every August, where anyone can learn how to implement the protocol with ease and success. You want to follow her on Facebook. Just look for Terry Wahls MD, and she's also on Twitter. And her Twitter sign is at Terry Wahls, Terry TerryWahls. And in this episode, she's going to go over her story, and she's going to talk about all the things that she went through to reverse her condition of multiple sclerosis naturally. So this is something that you'll want to take a listen to maybe once or twice or three times, and share this with your friends and family, especially those that you know who has some type of autoimmune condition. And not necessarily that this is the way that's going to work for them, but to give them some sense of hope and to give them another look at, the spectrum of health that things like functional medicine, diet, nutritional supplementation, all of those things can help their body. We're not necessarily promising a cure, but it is another route. And, hope can be some of the greatest things we can give. All right, let's get into this episode. So welcome to the show, Dr. Terry Wahls.
Oh, hey, thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here.
So, all right, let's jump straight into it. Take us to the moment that you were diagnosed with MS, and what was the first thing that was running through your mind?
Oh God, it was awful. I had just resigned from the Marshfield Clinic. I was starting at the University of Iowa, and I was feeling like, oh my God, have I just created a catastrophe for my family? What does this mean? Is this a slow disabling thing, a rapid disabling thing? It was really a terrifying 2 weeks while I was going through all the testing to sort out what it was that I had that had caused the weakness in my left leg.
And so about how long were you feeling symptoms and all that?
Well, the weakness in my left leg had been sort of building for a couple of weeks, which I had not really been aware of until I tried to walk 3 miles and realized that there was a big problem. Then I went to see my doc the next day and started getting the evaluation. In retrospect, I had been having symptoms probably 20 years with these episodes of pain that had been going on and getting progressively more troublesome. I'd had an episode of visual dimming 13 years earlier, and fortunately for me, my physicians had not put together the pain and the visual dimming to raise the possibility of MS, which is good because otherwise I would not have had my children. So I'm very glad they had not put it together 13 years earlier.
Okay, so I read, in your book, you said, and I quote, "Like most physicians, I was always focused on quickly diagnosing my patients and then using drugs and surgical procedures to treat them. That is until I became a patient myself. Conventional medicine was failing me. Why did you have that change in mindset?
Well, I before I was diagnosed, I was a conventional academic doc.
Okay.
I thought people were wasting their money on these vitamins and supplements and alternative treatments. But God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
I got to have my MS diagnosis. I knew that I should treat my disease aggressively, so I sought out the best center I could find, which is the Cleveland Clinic. Saw their best people, took the newest drugs, and still within 3 years, my disease had converted to progressive MS. I was getting weaker. I needed a tilt-recline wheelchair, and it looked to me like I was headed towards becoming bedridden, possibly demented. My pain was getting more and more difficult to control. And so that's when it occurred to me, like, well, conventional medicine is not stopping this. I'm going to start reading the basic science myself. Originally when I was first diagnosed, I'd started reading the science, and it was just so upsetting that I quit. But now that I knew how bad it was going to be, I went back to reading the science, looking at first for what was the latest new drug I could try. But then I had the aha moment, like, I can't get those new drugs. I better be reading about things I could access, which were vitamins and supplements. And so I started reading about other dementing illnesses with shrinking brains. And so I was reading a lot of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Huntington's, Lou Gehrig's disease. And I decided that mitochondria were the problem. Then I started reading what I could do to supplement and support my mitochondria.
Okay. For our listeners, let's take a little step back and explain to them, because some of them may not understand exactly what is MS.
So MS is a disease where the immune cells are attacking the insulation on the wiring between our brain cells. When there's an acute attack, that's called a relapse. And then we can do some repair work. Things function a little bit better. That's called a remission. And most people are originally diagnosed with relapsing remitting. But over time, the destructive damage continues. There's finally enough damage that there's no more spontaneous recovery, but there's a slow, steady decline. And depending on the person, you convert to that steady decline earlier or later in the course of your illness. And so my conversion occurred really pretty quickly after diagnosis.
Okay. So now you've done your, digging, your research. What were the first steps that you took to kind of get your health back?
I started, actually the very first thing I did, my Cleveland Clinic doctors told me about Lauren Cordain's work in the Paleo diet. So in 2002, after 20 years of being vegetarian, I adopted the Paleo diet, gave up all grains, all legumes, all dairy, because the science seemed to make sense. I continued to decline. Next year I needed chemotherapy and I needed my tilt-recline wheelchair. But I stayed with the Paleo diet because at least I was doing something. Then as I get into the wheelchair, I start reading about vitamins and supplements. I add creatine, carnitine, coenzyme Q, and a B vitamin. And after 6 months, I'm really pretty cranky. I feel like I've wasted my money. I stop them. And then I just can't get out of bed. I am completely exhausted. 3 days later, my wife comes in and gives me my supplements, said, honey, I think you ought to take these again. I take them, and the next day I can get up and go to work. And so I think, wow, that was really interesting. So 2 weeks later, I do the same thing. I stop my supplements. I'm completely exhausted. 3 days later, I start them up, but I can function again. So I decide that though they aren't enough to recover me, they're clearly doing something. And now I'm very excited that I'm learning stuff that my neurologist and primary care docs don't know to tell me. So I'm more excited about reading the basic science and beginning to slowly experiment on myself with what are other things that I can try. Now, at this point, I'm still very focused on a supplement program.
Okay.
And I'm very grateful that it's my perception my supplements are slowing my decline. which had been very rapid. So, that's really good news. My neurologists have made it very clear, though, that functions once lost when you have progressive MS are gone forever. They're never coming back. I'm still doing my simple little exercises that I can every day. I never miss a day, but I can do less and less and less. By the summer of 2007, I can't sit up anymore. I have a special zero gravity chair at work and one at home, so I can lean far back. Otherwise, I'm in bed. I can walk very short distances. I'm beginning to lose my keys and my phone. The pain is getting more difficult to control. The episodes are more frequent, more severe. My chief of staff pulls me into office to tell me that in 6 months he's assigned me to the traumatic brain injury clinic. I'll see patients without residence. And when I tell my wife about this, we both decide it's the VA's way of telling me that, we're done redesigning your job. You're going to have to finally take medical disability. And so, the July of 2007, I thought I knew my future, and it was pretty darn grim.
Yeah. So at this moment, you're still just on the supplements, right?
So I'm on the supplements. I'm still taking my disease-modifying drugs, Cellcept. And I'd gone through the ABCR drugs. I'd taken Tysabri, that new biologic. I'd taken mitoxantrone. I was on Cellcept. And these drugs all make you sick, but you take them because we're all terrified of becoming bedridden and demented. And so I'm still taking them, and I'm thinking, I'm going to become bedridden and demented anyway. But I want to put it off as long as I can, so I keep taking the disease-modifying drugs and my vitamins and my supplements. And, I have accommodated enough to life that I've learned to take each day one day at a time, and I can sort of let go of that. But it's certainly a challenging time.
So then what was your next steps after that?
Well, in August, I got my research packet for the Research and Development Committee. And so every month I was reviewing the research protocols, and I'd always been asking to review the stuff related to the brain. So there was a protocol that was about electrical stimulation of muscles in people who had acute traumatic injury to their spinal cord. And I read that, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. So then I searched for articles on PubMed. There were 212. And so I read through those abstracts. There were a couple articles using that for people with strokes and with cerebral palsy. And I convinced my physical therapist to let me have some test sessions. And he said, we could maybe grow more muscles using this electrical current, but he wasn't sure if my brain could talk to the muscles. And so if my brain couldn't talk to these new muscles, I was just putting ankle weights on my legs, and I was going to make it even harder to walk. Okay. But we're trying that. I tolerated it okay. And so I did this twice a day. I was sucking in my gut for my very simple little workout. And at the same time that I made that discovery, I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine online. Okay. And I ordered their course on neuroprotection. And so this was synchronized, audio synchronized PowerPoints. And it's like a 4-day conference that they had. So I was going through all the lectures. They had a big notebook and some cases. And so I'm deepening my understanding of what I can do for my mitochondria. I have a longer list of supplements that I'm taking. I'm doing my e-stim. And I feel like, maybe I can sit up just a little bit better. And then in December, so I've been doing this about 3 months, I have a aha moment. Like, what if I take this list of supplements that I'm taking and I figure out where that is in the food supply? So it's more research. I have these lists of foods I'm going to start emphasizing. And December 26th, we start this new way of focused eating. And about 3 weeks later, I start in the traumatic brain injury clinic. But what I discover is, my energy's improved. my mental clarity's improved. And in that first week, I'm just sort of watching my partners. So that's sort of a bye week. And I figure, okay, that doesn't. I figured I should be able to watch people work. And the next week, I'm starting to see patients, and I can do it.
Wow.
So at the end of the week,
fairly quick, right?
It's stunning.
Yeah.
It's stunning, So, I'm still in my wheelchair, but I'm standing up doing the exam, sitting down, and thinking I can do this. And I'm really surprised. My wife's surprised and so I'm thinking wow, maybe this is going to work out. At the end of 3 months, I'm starting to walk with a cane. And at 6 months, I'm walking around the Veterans Affairs Hospital without a cane. I still have a limp, but I'm walking around without a cane. And at 9 months, I'm able to walk around the block. And I've recovered really quite remarkably. But as part of having a progressive illness, you let go of having expectations. Just take each one day at a time. I don't know what to make of what's happening around me, but which is really pretty interesting.
Let me ask you. Let me stop you there. What's the mindset that you're going through all of this? Because I know a lot of people that have gone through similar issues, and a lot of them just throw in the towel and say, "Hey, look, this is my lot in life." What kept you staying the course?
Well, a couple of things. There's a great book that I love by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
I love that book.
One of his principal theses is that between every event in your life and your response is a space, and in that space you make a choice, and that defines our character. So I have 2 young kids, and so my mantra to myself is, your kids are watching. Are you going to show them model giving up? You're going to model giving, going on. And so I was going to model going on. When I was in the wheelchair, one of my partners invited me to write a case for our medical students, which I did. And then you normally give a lecture about that disease. And I decided instead to give a lecture about being evaluated and being diagnosed with progressive incurable illness and what that experience is like and what it taught me as a physician. And so that was my giving back to the world in terms of teaching these medical students about life and pain and function. And I really think that was a major turning point that I point to in terms of reclaiming my health, because that's when I was giving back to society.
Okay.
Then, several years later, I discovered functional medicine. I am physically recovering, and remarkably so, but I'm still in that take every day, one day at a time. I don't really know what this means. At 9 months, spring is coming. It's Mother's Day, and I've been sort of thinking, could I ride my bike around the block? And so I get my bike out. My family has a panic attack. We have a big family meeting. Can I ride my bike or not? And we decide that my daughter will run on the right, my son will run on the left, and my wife rides the bike behind me. And I get on the bike, and in fact, I can bike, and I bike around the block. We're all crying. And I have tears in my eyes now, because that is the miraculous moment when hope came back into my life.
Yeah. And, that's a lot of us, and I tell these things to, my patients, is sometimes even the simple things like that, we take that for granted, and to be able to have that back is miraculous in and of itself, right?
Absolutely.
And now, did you, when you started to investigate the foods, did you get rid of the supplements, or did you continue with the supplements and with the food?
I kept with the supplements.
Okay.
I added the food. The magic happens when I add the food. And the food plan is now what I call the Wahls diet. Over time, I've simplified my supplements. but I discovered if I try to take them away completely, I have more trouble with pain. So I think targeted supplements can be very, very helpful. But I have to remind everyone, I love the paleo diet, but it was certainly not enough to recover me. Supplements were helpful, but they were not enough to recover me. Even the complicated regimen that I got from functional medicine. I really had to integrate everything, ramp up the nutrition, have targeted supplements. I think the eStim was very helpful, and particularly in the speed of my recovery. And the paleo eating was helpful. When you're as ill as I was, and remember, I couldn't sit up anymore. So I needed everything to the max to recover.
So what were the key components to the Wahls diet? What did you put together, and what did you change actually from the paleo?
So from the paleo, I'd already taken out all the grains, all the dairy, all the legumes.
Now, was this by experiment for you?
No. This was based on having read Lauren Cordain's The Paleo Diet book, and having read his papers. So I went ahead and did all of that. I also took out eggs because eggs are another common food sensitivity. So that was a new thing that I took out. And then I ramped up the vegetables in a very specific way to get the nutrients that science was telling me that brain cells needed to really thrive, and that my mitochondria needed. And there were 20 nutrients that I was tracking. I now track 36 nutrients. So the big picture things we're adding were lots of greens for the vitamin K, which is we now know very, very important for making myelin. The sulfur-rich vegetables, cabbage, onion, mushroom family, because that helps me process, eliminate trash, helps my brain make gamma-aminobutyric acid, an important neurotransmitter, and helps my cells make glutathione, which are a very important antioxidant. And then the next group of vegetables had to do with the deeply pigmented vegetables in the beets, carrots, peppers, and berries, because those polyphenols are associated a lot in many studies with protection of the brain. And then I was more attentive to grass-fed, wild-caught fish meat. Had liver a couple times a week, and started adding fermented foods into the diet. And that, it was like 9 cups of vegetables. And probably once I got into this, it was probably more like 12 to 15 cups of vegetables. I was just phenomenally craving, particularly big salads. So I was having 6 cups of greens easily every day.
Now, were you cooking these, or were you eating these raw?
A mixture of both.
Okay.
We have big salads, but we also grew to love bacon and greens a great deal.
Okay. And about how long after you started implementing the complete picture here did you start seeing improvements?
So brain fog and energy, dramatic improvements, I'd say within 6 weeks, which would continue to accrue over the next several years. But I could tell within 6 weeks that my brain fog was improving. My energy was definitely improving. My ability to sit up, so I could sit up to eat a meal at the table, again, that was improving in a month's time. In the end of 3 months' time, I took my first walk in the hallway at the hospital using my cane to get the mail. That was a very big day for me. Then at about 6 months, I felt pretty comfortable walking without a cane. At 9 months, I mentioned I did the bike tour. At 12 months, I did a 20-mile bike ride with my family. And I stayed doing the electrical stimulation of the muscles as part of my routine for about 4 years. I was seeing physical therapy regularly for 4 years throughout all of this time.
Wow. And let me step back with the eStim. what were you doing with the e-stim? Like, how are you using it?
Well, I'm an athlete, and this is a pretty common thing athletes do to speed recovery after an injury or to prevent muscle atrophy with an injury. So you do an isometric contraction of the muscle while you're applying electrical current to that muscle over the motor units. And so it builds muscle mass. And if you can do 15 minutes a day every day to the injured muscle, you prevent atrophy. If you can do 45 minutes to an hour, you can grow muscle mass. So I was targeting my weakest muscles and was working on growing muscle mass. And that was helpful. So I was targeting my belly and my back, and then the muscles that lift my ankle, my feet up at the ankle, so ankle dorsiflexion.
So how does that regenerate nerves? What's the physiology there?
What's the physiology there?
Yeah.
The activation of the motor unit is very helpful. If you don't keep activating the motor unit, the muscles begin to deteriorate quickly. Then you lose mitochondria. It's quite damaging to our metabolic function. When you activate those motor units, you'll also develop more mitochondria, a much healthier muscle cell, and you'll develop and release nerve growth factors locally, and you'll release endorphins locally, which will get circulated up to the brain and have a favorable impact on mood and lower inflammation. So one of the things that we observed was when I did the e-stim, it had a terrific impact on my mood.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting. Now, within the integrative medicine circles, the hot topic within the last couple of years is the microbiome. Now, explain to us because not a lot of people actually understand this, and people kind of think that they do, and they kind of just take, I need to take probiotics to help my microbiome, and they see a commercial for like Activia, and they're like, okay, I'm great. But explain to us the link between the gut, the brain, and then what we need to do to enhance the microbiome.
Well, our awareness of how the bacteria and yeast and parasites in our bowels help us run the chemistry of life and help us eat our food, digest each other's byproducts, and some of their byproducts diffuse into our bloodstream, will migrate up to our brain and influence our behaviors and our cravings in ways that make winners and losers of the bacteria that are living in our bowels. And so when you eat a lot of sugar, we're stimulating yeast and bacteria that create more craving for sugar. When we've changed our diets really quite radically over the last 300 years and even more over the last 50 years with all this extra sugar and white flour, fertilizing what we really think of as disease-promoting bacteria and yeast. When I eliminated sugar, processed foods, with the paleo diet, that was helpful. But the next really big thing I did was when I ramped up all those vegetables, and I was eating, probably 12 to 15 cups of vegetables, I was feeding and fertilizing these health-promoting bacteria in a very big way. So it probably caused a huge shift in my microbiome. And likely I was crowding out a lot of the sugar-loving yeast and bacteria that were so harmful. And really the most powerful thing we can do in terms of determining who's going to grow in our bowels is what we are feeding, what we're eating ourselves, and what we are fertilizing in our gut. If we eat a lot of sugar and processed foods, we're fertilizing a very different kind of food mix of bacteria than if we're eating 9 to 12 to 15 servings of vegetables. If we're eating only meat, we have a different microbiome. If we're eating only fat, we're having a different kind of microbiome. It's very sensitive to the food that you eat. Because you have like 1,000 trillion microbes in your gut.
Yeah.
If you take a probiotic capsule, like maybe 5, 10, 15, or even a really big one, 50 billion colony forming units, that's nothing compared to 100 trillion.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I gotta jump back to one thing that I was thinking about is when you started making this recovery, what were your colleagues saying?
Well, they were really stunned. People were very excited to see me walking around.
Yeah.
Now, what was very interesting, when I changed my practice and I quit using drugs and surgeries, and I'm using conversations about diet and lifestyle and meditation and exercise and vegetables, and I'm talking about fish oil and I'm talking about vitamins, that made people uncomfortable. And so I had to go into the chief of staff's office multiple times when he'd say, people are upset. What's going on? Why is this happening? And I would, take an armful of scientific papers, explain the science behind what I was doing. And my chief of staff ultimately became a huge fan and said, look, if she hurts someone, we'll do a peer review. But if she's not hurting anyone, vegetables really are not a problem, folks. But it's interesting. It was very uncomfortable for folks to see how I changed my practice. But then, fortunately, my chief of staff was a huge fan, big supporter. The chair of medicine became the dean of the College of Medicine. He encouraged me to write a clinical protocol, which we got approved, and we did a little trial. And every year, we're putting posters out with our progress on the clinical trial. And plus, my clinic, my Traumatic Brain Injury Clinic, is just doing amazingly well. The outcomes begin to speak for themselves, and our research outcomes began to speak for themselves. So then when we had the before and after videos of the gait changes, then people decided that maybe I'm this brilliant visionary as opposed to this, oddity. Yeah.
No, I can see how that happens. It's just interesting how, you being in that environment of, conventional medicine, of drug surgery, and then shifting it. And then how does that, change the course of things?
Yeah, I certainly met resistance, not from the patients, but from my colleagues who thought maybe I was into quackery. But I kept speaking physiology, biochemistry, the basic science, and then doing these studies and having some very impressive results.
Yeah. That's awesome. So at the beginning of the book, you wrote, unless you understand what your body actually needs, you won't know what advice to take and what advice to leave. You won't know what foods to choose. You won't know which diet is the right one for your condition. You won't know how to fuel your own cells for optimal health. How do you recommend, or what do you recommend people, the layperson, to get that knowledge? Where do they start?
I'm one of the few, and probably the only author with a diet book that also does clinical research, nutrition research. When we did our clinical trial, we had to do menus, recipes, 24-hour recalls with somebody following the diet, which was me, to verify that it was nutritionally adequate. Because this seems so crazy to folks. The dietitian who completed that study for us said, she had been doing this dietary research for 30 years and said this was the most nutrient-dense diet she'd ever analyzed. Then when I wrote the book, and when we're doing the subsequent clinical trials, we again create menus, recipes, do a detailed analysis to verify that the diet rules that I've written out, when you follow them, do in fact provide the nutritional that science says our brain cells and mitochondria need. No one else has done that. Even as much as I love the paleo diet, some of the single analyses of the paleo diet have shown that even that still has gaps in it. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's that's one of the advantages. So I've done that work. So at least we know that my various diet plans are completely sound. So I would encourage people to pick up the book, begin one of the three diets, and adapt it to your cultural tastes. And I think it's really important for people to begin to cook at home, which is why I also wrote the cookbook. Because in my lifestyle clinic, we saw that so many people have forgotten how to cook, or they never learned how. And so they just really did not know how to cook with real food and ingredients. So we gave them cooking classes, and we got them feeling much more comfortable cooking. And then I decided I need to take this to the public. And so I wrote the cookbook to give people the skills and comfort to begin making simple, enjoyable, fun foods for themselves, their kids, and their grandkids.
Yeah, guys, if you guys haven't gotten the book yet, go out and get the book. I'll put the link to it in the show notes. When I first got the book, you, like any other book, you look at it, and the way I look at books is I look at the size of it, and I'm like, wow, that's going to be a couple weeks read. But in actuality, guys, it was such a compelling book that it only took me about a few hours because it was just going. Anyway, it's like me sitting there with you talking to me about your story and what you went through, and then saying, okay, here's what you need to do with your diet and all the kind of the stuff that surrounds it. I really like the way you wrote the book.
Yeah, I was very happy with how it turned out. And I worked really hard at making sure this is very understandable. So to make the science very, very approachable, so people understand why we do things the way we do, but in a way that is easy to understand. You don't have to have a PhD to read my books.
Yeah. So a couple questions. What's your thoughts on, because this has been circling around in the integrative medicine community. What's your thoughts of putting stuff like hyperbaric chambers, intermittent fasting, all of that stuff for a person that's going through a neurodegenerative disease? So
the intermittent fasting, absolutely a terrific idea. Fasting, I like to eat once a day. So I have a 24-hour fast between eating. So I have a little more ketones, and that stimulates the number of mitochondria in my cell and the efficiency of the mitochondria. And I eat lots and lots of vegetables, so I still have a healthy microbiome. I occasionally will go 1 to 3 days without on a fast, and I might do that a couple times a year, again, for the same kind of health benefits. Great research that this is a very potent anti-aging and great way to protect your brain. Hyperbaric oxygen, some very interesting studies about that. That may be useful, but that's a cost. And so it's going to be a little more restrictive in terms of being able to access that as opposed to the fasting, which you can control. I also get asked a lot about stem cells
yes.
for neurodegenerative. So let me talk about that.
Yeah.
Stem cells are great therapy for orthopedic injuries, trauma-related injuries. You can often get by with one stem cell infusion and have really a nice response with early or moderate arthritic changes. And I've gone to stem cell conferences where the practitioners are very excited about the stem cells that are given frequently when it's a fat-derived stem cell for people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, progressive MS, and they can stop the decline. And they have to give their infusions every month or couple of months. We stop the decline by changing the diet and the lifestyle, and we often have marked improvement in function. Well, and I've presented at some of these stem cell conferences and had some lively conversations with these folks that if you don't change the root cause of the degenerative disease, you have to keep doing stem cells every month or two forever. And so I pushed them to say, imagine what would happen if you did diet and lifestyle. That many of these folks won't need the stem cells, but there'll be some folks who will still benefit because I can't fix everyone. But if you did diet and lifestyle and stem cells for the people who needed it, hyperbaric for the people who needed it, we might be able to really have able to stop and reverse these processes for nearly everyone then.
Wow.
That's a theory. I don't know, but I think it's certainly quite plausible.
Yeah, that's a a big topic. I had a few patients undergo stem cell therapy for knee replacement and then also for low back stuff. And they came out really well. And I've been reading some of the research that you were talking about on the forefront of that. So that is a right over the horizon. I think that we're going to come down to that. A couple last questions. What are the implications of diet? Meaning who is this actually for? Like, do you actually have to wait till you get some type of devastating diagnosis, or can the average person just do it?
So we've had a lot of college students want to come work with me because I'm such a dynamic researcher here now. People are very excited to be in my lab.
Yeah.
And we have them do the study diet for 2 weeks, keep logs before they work with us. And all of these kids who are in their prime of their life uniformly come back and tell us how much better they feel, more alert, better moods, migraines are gone, their anxiety is gone, their pelvic pain is gone. And so even our young, healthy people are experiencing health benefits. In my traumatic brain injury clinic, that people did very well. In the therapeutic lifestyle clinic, we'd have folks with a wide variety of autoimmune problems, and people with diabetes, obesity, and all these folks had improvement of their biologic, the biomarkers, reduced need for pains, reduced need for their medications. So if you're healthy, likely you'll discover that you have more energy, a lot better mental clarity and mood. If you have early disease, you'll probably have normalization of your biomarkers, need far fewer medications. If you're later in your disease, it's going to take longer, but we still saw people have reduction in pain, normalization of their blood sugars and blood pressures, and a steady decline in their number of prescription meds that they need. So people will generally improve, but it's true. The later you are in the disease, those improvements will come more slowly. The earlier you are in your disease, the more rapid it is. And if you don't have any disease, what you'll probably just notice is, man, I'm just feeling so much better, so much more alive.
So it's for everybody, guys. And this is a lifestyle that I believe that everybody should adopt. Now, last question. What are the 3 things that you would leave the listeners with? What can they do right now to make a difference in their health?
I think the most important thing that we need to do is to begin to eat home-cooked meals at home. And to teach our children to cook. We are so busy, so fast, that we are not teaching our children how to feel comfortable making food. And that puts them at economic risk, and it puts them at health risks. Now, obviously, when they're making that food, I want them to have lots of vegetables and not have gluten and not have particularly dairy. But for the health of the country, if we can all, as a country and for our families, start making food at home, make recipes, make a menu, plan. We'll have better social skills with our kids, better grades for our kids, better health for the nation. Now,
when I was growing up, we always had dinner at the table, and there was that was a sacred time, and that's true for like most societies, right? I mean, everybody, it's a big thing. You go to Europe and they take like 2 hours off to have a meal together. And it's a social bonding time that you eat with friends and family, and you talk about life and what's going on in life. It's a big part of why the Blue Zone communities do well is that social bonding around the mealtime. Huge. Love the Blue Zones. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and for having the courage to go through this and stick through it and then pave the way for, generations to come and to write this book, to give others hope and to give others guidance for that. As we're so in debt for you to that. Any last words you want to leave our listeners?
Well, come check out my website. We have lots of resources to help you get started on this journey. And we can. It's really important that we not be afraid of eating this radical thing known as vegetables.
Don't be afraid of the vegetables. I love that. What's your website?
TerryWahls.com. That's TERRY. Wahls, WAHLS.com.
Perfect. I'll put those all on the show notes. Again, guys, listen to what was said today. Go back and listen to this a couple more times and share this with your friends and family. Also, pick up the book and then apply the knowledge that's within that. All right. We thank you so much for your time and your knowledge.
Thank you very much, Mike.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Wow, what a great interview we had. Lots of information. So go back and take some notes. Get the book, especially. It'll be in the show notes. And follow some of the recipes. Some of the recipes are really, really good. Like I said, if you guys have friends or family that are going through stuff like MS or any type of autoimmune disease, you need to be educating yourself in this arena. So this is such a great episode to open the doors. And like I said before in the beginning of the podcast, this is not necessarily something that will definitely cure. We're not saying, we're not guaranteeing it, but it is another way. It is another avenue that they can explore and try, rather than just relying on the things that they've been given and feeling like they've lost hope, because that's one of the biggest things that I said is having hope. All right, guys. Thank you again for listening to this entire episode. And if you found great value in this, please go to the iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. Share your thoughts, share your, express your emotion for what we had in this podcast. Let Dr. Terry Wahls know how much you appreciated her time and her mind for pushing through all of this so that she can share this with the entire world. I'd appreciate if you guys share this with your friends and family, and if we can get the word out of the What Up Doc University podcast, get it out to the world so that we can change the lives and impact the lives of thousands of people. But you know what? It's come to the end of this episode. Till the next time, we got some more great episodes coming up for you guys. So stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Again, leave us a 5-star review. Thank you very much. But till the next time, this is Dr. Mike from What Up Doc University podcast and Velocity Wellness Center saying be well and aloha.